My married life has not been as interesting as I expected, although I can't complain. Kevin, my husband, works hard as a contractor to support our life in a luxurious house with all the comforts, where I spend most of the time, but completely alone. My dream is to be a successful actress, and I continue to attend castings that my manager gets me, but I haven't gotten a role in a long time. I spend my days reading scripts and rehearsing scenes, but there is always a crushing silence at home, and I was very bored until my brother-in-law started visiting us frequently. His name is Caleb, and he's not coming to visit per se. My husband hired him to do some repairs around the house, but I'm really enjoying his presence because not only does he keep me company, but he's also extremely handsome and fun. Caleb is only a couple of years younger than Kevin, but he has an adventurous spirit, and that makes him very different from my husband, who is always thinking about how to make money, close new deals, and invest in the stock market. I didn't know how much I craved fun until my brother-in-law started getting more involved in our lives. The first day, Caleb worked on repairing the garden fence, and I settled on the porch to read a new script while he did so. This way we could both join each other. "What's the story about? Something interesting?" he asked me, interrupting my reading. Actually, yes, depending on how you look at it. "It's about an attractive teacher who has a forbidden romance with one of her students at college," said. "Then you have it easy. They will surely give you the role," he told me, and I raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "Why are you so sure?" asked. "The first thing I imagine when you tell me that it is a beautiful teacher is someone like you. You are very attractive," he answered, and I blushed immediately, although I felt flattered and felt some tickles in my stomach upon hearing his compliment. I went back to reading and tried to concentrate while he hammered on the gate. The sound of the hammer piercing the wood with nails was the least of it. I couldn't stop watching him. He had on a white t-shirt that showed off the muscles of his very well-formed arms and faded jeans that made his backside stand out very well. As he worked, he perspired, and the sweat on his skin seemed extremely attractive to me, especially when his shirt began to become transparent. If I made an effort, I could even glimpse the shadow of his abs. I became absorbed detailing his remarkably muscular body, and he must have noticed the weight of my gaze because he turned around and smiled mischievously at me. I woke up from that kind of hypnosis in which I had immersed myself and put my eyes back on the paper I had in my hands. I felt embarrassed and didn't look up again until he finished. He looked visibly tired, so I headed to the kitchen and returned with a pitcher of cold, sweet lemonade. While he drank his second glass, I couldn't help but follow with my gaze the beads of sweat that slid from his forehead to his chin, passing along his neck and reaching his pectorals. "Do you mind if I take it off? It's too hot," he said, pointing to his shirt, and I nodded as if it didn't matter. "Go ahead," I answered him, and my voice broke a little. I couldn't believe the effect that my brother-in-law was having on me. I was absorbed in admiring the shape of his arms, but when he took off his shirt, it was even worse. Just as I had imagined, his abs looked hard as a board and were completely defined. Seeing them, I felt the strange urge to reach out my hand to touch them, but I just continued admiring them. I suppose that might have made him uncomfortable, but he just smiled at me. Maybe he was used to having that effect on girls. I took the jug and left without saying anything, but that image would remain forever in my memory. The days passed, and I began to enjoy Caleb's company more and more. It was so nice to share with another person in that big house. Plus, he always told jokes to make me laugh, and I felt like the energy flowed between us easily. While he did the work, I tried to stay close in case he needed something or just as an excuse to talk. One day, he was repairing the gutters on the roof that leads to the backyard, and I decided to go for a quick swim in the pool. I chose a cute bikini that left very little to the imagination and prepared to enter the water, but first I decided to apply sunscreen. He was not intimidated. He continued admiring what I was doing from the stairs. "You need a hand?" told me. I was sad at first, but I was definitely eager for a rapprochement between us. "Could you?" I replied, extending the bottle towards him. Caleb came down from the ladder, grabbed the bottle, and brushed the hair off my back. Then he began to carefully spread the cream over my shoulders, down my back, until he reached the edge of my bikini bottom. At the contact of my skin with his, I felt as if electricity ran through my body and my breathing accelerated. When I felt him stop touching me, I turned around and we were face to face, very close to each other. Caleb just stared into my eyes, not saying anything, and I did the same. That moment seemed much longer than it actually was. Then he grabbed me by the chin and kissed me on the lips. Caleb had a particular smell that I loved. It was a mix between wood and eucalyptus. That fresh aroma was mixed with the sweat produced by his efforts working under the sun. I didn't know exactly what it was, but it surely had to do with his pheromones, because it attracted me like a magnet and I couldn't get enough of it no matter how much I inhaled it. One day, Kevin asked Caleb to repair a moisture problem that had started to develop in our room. That afternoon, he was completely dedicated to that work, and I decided to keep him company. They have a big bed. I can't imagine everything you and my brother have done there. He told me, and I didn't expect that comment, so I didn't know what to answer right away. Actually, we don't have as much action as I would like, I told him, and he turned to look at me in disbelief. I don't believe you. If I had a woman like you waiting for me at home every night, there wouldn't be a single time that we would go to sleep early. Told me. Really? Or are you just bragging? I told him and gave him a mischievous look. He let out a discreet laugh and continued with what he was doing. When he finished, I told him he could take a bath and invited him to have dinner with us. You have clean towels in the bathroom closet. I will be preparing dinner. Please come down to the kitchen as soon as you finish. I told him and left, although a part of me would rather have entered into the shower with my brother-in-law. I couldn't get the image of his abs and the feeling of his mouth on mine out of my mind. While I was cooking, I got a call from Kevin letting me know that he would be arriving late that night and not to wait for him to eat. As soon as I hung up the phone, Caleb appeared wearing only a towel around his waist. I swallowed thickly as my eyes involuntarily slid from his Adam's apple to his interesting bulge. "What will we eat?" told me. "Hey, sorry," Kevin called. "He says we shouldn't wait for him to eat because he'll be late. Can you help me prepare spaghetti?" I told him, but I couldn't keep my gaze fixed on his eyes. I felt like his body was calling me, and I had a crazy desire to go for it. Let me try that sauce," told me. He approached me and grabbed my wrist to bring my hand with the paddle towards his mouth. I saw him caress the shoulder with the tip of his tongue to taste the sauce, and that caused palpitations between my legs. I was eager to feel his tongue on my most sensitive area. His hand slid down the sides of my body, removing all my clothes until I was completely vulnerable to him. I was enjoying caressing his pecs and squeezing the muscles in his arms while gently nibbling on his lips. I lay back on the table and spread my legs. He continued to run all over my body with his mouth until he reached the part where I most wanted to have him. Then he leaned over and began to kiss it, lick it, and caress it with his chin. And with his nose, I even noticed when he inhaled hard to delight himself with my scent. I was completely delighted and looking forward to what he was going to do to me. I was so eager to give myself to him, and the situation was perfect because my husband would be late. That gave us enough time to enjoy it. I could feel the humidity that had been generated by the emotion I was experiencing at that moment. As his mouth passed over every part of me, it gave me an extremely enjoyable sensation that I would describe as somewhere between shivering and tingling, truly addictive. I felt him settle in and kiss my most sensitive area. At that moment, I closed my eyes and let myself go. I slid my fingers through his hair and bit my lips while he made all kinds of movements with his mouth. I felt that the sensations were increasing more and more inside me to the point that my heartbeat accelerated. At times, I felt the need to bring my legs together, but Caleb prevented this and kept them completely open. While I was in that position, I couldn't stop imagining what the scene we were playing out at the kitchen table looked like, and I liked that even more. Caleb must have noticed that his efforts were having very good results, because at that moment, I felt him slide a finger into me very easily. That gesture made me shudder completely, and then I began to move to the rhythm that my body was asking me to. Without stopping playing with his finger, he continued to kiss me on the mouth while holding my front with his other hand, playing with it and kneading it as he wanted. The sensation I was getting from all of those at once was something I had never felt with Kevin, and I couldn't help but compare them. Then what Caleb had told me earlier came back to my mind. If I had a woman like you waiting for me at home every night, there wouldn't be a single time we would go to sleep early. And I wondered if perhaps I'd married the wrong brother. That didn't matter right now because I was here, having the best of encounters with Caleb, and I was ready to enjoy it. Later, I could think about the consequences and let my conscience play tricks on me. But now, and while this lasted, I would give free rein to my most primitive womanly instincts. I came out of my thoughts at the same time that Caleb withdrew his finger, only to give way to something much larger and more appetizing. That which I had not been able to stop admiring when he was wrapped in the towel. He did it in one go and immediately started moving, leaving it inside most of the time. The palpitations inside me accelerated. I could feel the blood rushing from my agitated heart to the most sensitive area of my body, which tightened around his, as if it wanted to imprison him to make us one. Caleb sat upright on the edge of the table, and I could tell he was really active. Then he started to increase the pace, and I enjoyed it even more. I was completely agitated, sweating on the table, and my nervous system was sending multiple sensations to all ends of my body. I begged him not to stop, and he, although visibly exhausted, increased the rhythm even more. That felt incredible. That hit my most sensitive area. "Please, Caleb, don't stop. I've never enjoyed it so much," I said between gasps. I begged him more and more. I knew he was liking what I was telling him. I could tell my words were having an impact on him. He kept that accelerated rhythm and used his thumb where I wanted it most. That was something I couldn't stand, and suddenly I exploded in a wave of infinite sensations that I ended up pouring all over him. Caleb immediately released everything he had accumulated on my belly and laid his body on top of mine as we both breathed in agitated and exhausted breaths. We had been so focused about what we were doing, we didn't notice when Kevin arrived. As soon as we got up, we saw him standing in the doorway with his eyes full of tears and his mouth half open. The rest is history. Tell me what you thought of my confession. Would you face the consequences to get what you want? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. See you soon. It all started 4 months ago when my husband and I decided it was time to spruce up the kitchen. We spent some time reviewing a couple of companies that were dedicated to kitchen design, but they were all expensive. But one day a neighbor recommended a bricklayer to my husband. And after speaking with the guy, my husband hired him to remodel the kitchen and do the carpentry work on the cabinets. James, my husband, had negotiated with the bricklayer to pay him double if he did the job alone. I didn't want to have a bunch of workers in the house, so my husband looked for a quick and affordable solution. And the bricklayer accepted. They agreed to a visit, and I met him there. He is 22 years old and lives in the same neighborhood about 5 blocks away. His name is Benjamin, and he comes from a low-income family. He has worked since he was a teenager, and most of the neighbors know him. He has done all kinds of jobs, such as a carpenter and gardener, and after getting a part-time job in a construction company when he came of age, he began offering his masonry services. He was very popular in the neighborhood, and the best thing of all was that most of our neighbors had worked with him, so we had good references of his work. After analyzing what my husband and I wanted to do in the kitchen, Benjamin explained to us how we would carry out the project. According to his estimates, it would take him 3 months to finish the remodeling, so my husband and I agreed, and that's how it all began. At first, everything seemed fine, but the tranquility did not last long. One afternoon, I met with 2 neighbors to talk, and one of them warned me to be careful with Benjamin. I was surprised by her comment, so I asked her what she meant. "Don't tell me you don't know, Jessica," said Melanie, one of the most gossipy neighbors I knew. I was confused when I noticed that Tamara also looked at me like she didn't believe it. "I don't understand," I said, confused. "What am I supposed to know about him? Don't tell me he has bad habits." "I wish it were that," Melanie responded with a giggle. "I heard that the boy is a Casanova and has a big friend, you know what I mean," she said, raising her eyebrows suggestively. "Do you remember the woman who was widowed last year?" I nodded in response. Melanie took a sip of coffee before continuing. "Well, people say they were lovers, and that she was so in love that she overcame the loss of her husband." "Wow," I murmured, a little impressed. I had seen Benjamin when we first met, and I thought he was handsome. "If it's just a rumor, fine, but if it's not, be careful, friend," the other neighbor advised, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Don't fall into his game." When night came, I didn't want to mention anything to my husband because he was excited about our kitchen remodel. If I told him that there was a ridiculous rumor about the bricklayer, it would worry him unnecessarily. Furthermore, it was just gossip from neighbors who spend much of their time criticizing the lives of others, which is why I didn't pay attention to it. Benjamin came from Monday to Friday from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. He had a half-hour break at noon for lunch, and then he continued with the remodeling. Every day I invited him to lunch as an act of courtesy, and during those shared lunches I got to know a little about him, but he never talked to me about his life, but rather about his work, what he would do the following week. The first few days I was a little suspicious of his presence after hearing the rumors, but seeing that he seemed so focused on his work, I felt relieved for not believing the rumors. That calm boy couldn't be as they describe him. At the end of the day, rumors are just rumors. Unfortunately for me, my neighbor's warning came true. There is a saying that where there's smoke, there's fire, there's no smoke without fire, and I confirmed it in a bad way one afternoon when I went to the dining room to look for water and found Benjamin without a shirt. At the moment, I was startled, and my instinct was to take a step back so that he wouldn't notice my presence. But he heard the footsteps and turned around. We stared at each other without saying anything. My eyes were weak, and I couldn't help but glance at him. Benjamin had brown skin from the sun and 6 feet tall. He had a muscular and athletic body. At that moment, my mind forgot that it was inappropriate to stare at someone because I only reacted when Benjamin walked towards me. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" he asked with a hoarse tone of voice. His voice made me react abruptly. "Oh my God, Benjamin, what are you doing without a shirt?" "It's hot," he replied with a smile. And something in my mind short-circuited. I knew that smile well. It wasn't friendly, not funny. He wasn't teasing or trying to be friendly. It was a mischievous smile, the kind men used when they knew they had the woman in the palm of their hand. "I'll bring you a fan," I said hurriedly, trying not to look down at his torso. But from that day on, Benjamin's actions began to be more alarming. Sometimes I questioned if they were just my ideas, if I was imagining the situation. Maybe the gossip about Benjamin was creating false ideas in me, but my intuition told me that I was not wrong. I didn't know if he was married or engaged, and I didn't care because I wasn't willing to sacrifice my marriage for a relationship that had no future. Or so I thought until one day I went into the kitchen bathroom to change the towels and found Benjamin coming out of the shower in his birthday suit. From that day on, I couldn't get him out of my mind. When night came and the need bubbled in my body, driving my fingers to meet my need, Benjamin would come to my thoughts, taking everything in his path. At first, I felt bad for thinking about him, for using his body in my imagination. But I knew he was teasing me, that he wasn't as innocent as I thought. After a week of fulfilling my wishes on his behalf, my perspective changed. Their reckless actions, suggestive comments, and heated glances stopped making them uncomfortable. I began to accept them, to wait for them. As the kitchen remodel neared completion, the sensations I experienced for the bricklayer became more pronounced in my daily life. It wasn't love, I knew, but the attraction was so great that I felt like I was floating in a bubble. One look from him was enough to make my body shudder, and when night came, my mind recreated all those fantasies that before only came to my mind when I needed inspiration. Benjamin attracted me a lot, and what was happening between us was nothing more than desire. It was clear. When I said goodbye to my husband in the mornings, I ran to my room to get out of my pajamas and get dressed. I put on makeup and a dress every day, wondering what expression Benjamin would make when he saw me. And the moment he arrived and greeted me, looking at me with those fiery eyes, I knew he liked what he saw. But after 2 days of games that ended nowhere, I began to despair. Isn't Melanie supposed to have said that Benjamin had seduced a neighbor? Wasn't he supposed to make the first move, or was he waiting for me to make the move? I didn't know, and I was already starting to get tired. So one morning, when he was busy stacking the brushes to varnish the cabinets, I hugged him from behind. He stayed still while I pressed my body against his back. "My lady?" Benjamin asked in a whisper, but my mouth seemed sealed with a spell of silence. I didn't dare say anything, afraid it would make me back down. So I squeezed him harder and ran my hands over his stomach. My hands traced a slow path from the center of his body, lightly brushing the waistband of his pants where the hairs peeked out, and then up to his sternum. And they climbed a little higher and higher until other hands caught up with them on the road. Benjamin freed himself from my embrace and faced me face to face. He freed one of my hands, but held the other firmly. His hand was big, and that detail made me wonder what his fingers would feel like in my center. "I want to kiss you," Benjamin said with a hoarse voice. "Do it," I answered. My body trembled. He kissed me passionately, and when we separated to breathe, his lips took a different path, a path that shook every particle of my body. His arms hugged me against his chest, and once again I was overcome with an overwhelming need to melt against him, to satisfy that voice that cried out to make him mine, to possess every centimeter of this specimen that had dared to achieve what he wanted. The way he held me was gentle, like he was touching something delicate, but his mouth was still on mine as if he wanted to absorb my soul. That day I discovered an unknown side of myself. Benjamin was a passionate lover who had led me to explore things I had never dared to experience. He guided me, accompanied me, and liberated me in so many ways that I felt exhausted and happily satisfied when it was all over. The feeling of reaching the sky so many times in a row had been amazing. My body and soul were melting with each wave of sensations, with each power play he exerted. When noon arrived, the alarm on his phone rang, and that made us break out of the bubble where we'd been trapped since the morning. We both dressed in a hurry, and when I was going to leave the dining room, Benjamin held my arm firmly. "Mrs. Jessica, are you okay?" he asked in a cautious tone. He kept calling me that, but at the time I didn't question it. I nodded immediately, but he seemed to be analyzing every expression on my face for a more certain answer. "I am," I assured him with a smile. How could I not be? I had been fantasizing about him for weeks, possessed by the idea of having him for myself, of finding out if the rumors were true, and of course they were. Benjamin was young, but very experienced and with a big friend. He was a man forged by life, hard as a rock, but like every man, he had a weakness. And theirs were mature women like me, who have been absorbed by our marriages, who have forgotten what it feels like to be satisfied, women who have never again been pleasured by an insatiable like him. What had started as an idea, as a fantasy produced by a rumor, had come to pass. I had confirmed everything that was said about Benjamin, and it was delighted with every aspect of him, and was sure there was more to Benjamin, things that he wouldn't show at first. But from the way he had done it to me, I knew he had more to give, and I wanted to discover every aspect of him, know each layer. I knew his behavior wasn't right, but neither was mine. We were two people giving in to their most hidden fantasies, and I knew I wanted more, and I would have it. Tomorrow at the same hour, I asked in the afternoon when Benjamin was about to leave the house. He gave me a mischievous look that answered my question, and the next day we did it again. For the next few days, we couldn't stop, and I didn't care. I didn't care if it was just a matter of desire, if there was no love, if it was just that and that's it. I had no expectations with him because I understood that there was no us. We were just two people who wanted each other. So am I a bad person for falling into my bricklayer's game? That's the question I've been asking myself lately. Would you have done anything differently? Would he have fallen into temptation if he were another man? These were questions I could never answer. My decisions had led me to a place from which I could not leave, a place where a young bricklayer becomes the protagonist of my most hidden desires. I cheated on my husband with an employee who was not only young, but who I saw every day. But my desire was stronger than my conscience, and even though I knew it was wrong, I couldn't stop it. Not when the bricklayer gave me things that my husband didn't, not when the bricklayer met my needs. With Benjamin, I was discovering things I never imagined. But what begins always ends, and finally the last week arrived. My husband came home more frequently, so my meetings with Benjamin were no longer so constant. "Love, what do you think?" my husband asked as he put his arm around me. Benjamin is very skilled. I nodded, feeling shame rush to my cheeks. Benjamin was not only skilled in carpentry and masonry, but also at what I liked. But that was something my husband never had to know. "Yes, it turned out beautiful," I said. Benjamin smiled back at me, but not in the way he did when he took over my being, when he made me reach nirvana so many times on the couch or on the dining room table. This time he smiled at me the way a friend would, loving and impersonal. There was something in his body language that made me think he was saying goodbye. "All that's left to do is apply the varnish to this area, and that's it," Benjamin explained a few minutes later. My husband would ask him occasional questions, and he would answer them. I followed them closely, trying to hide the attraction that moved me towards Benjamin, which made my eyes only see him. And as my husband said goodbye, I wondered if what had happened with Benjamin had been a figment of my imagination, or if the rumors had planted a fantasy in my mind that had felt so real. The next day, the last day of work of Benjamin, I took advantage of when my husband went out to do some shopping to make him mine for the last time. For an hour, we were locked in the guest bathroom in complete silence. He sat me on the sink counter, and there, hidden from my husband, he gave me one last taste of his nectar. On that occasion, while our bodies were saying goodbye in the only way they knew how, I thought that there were other areas of my house that needed remodeling, and Benjamin was the right man to carry them out. And I would be the hostess who would guide him to do an exceptional job, both in my house and in my body. Several times remorse has taken hold of me, and sometimes I even thought about confessing everything to my husband, but I know that would be the end of our marriage forever. For the moment, I keep it to myself, quietly. What did you think of my story? How would you have acted in a similar situation? If you liked it, don't forget to comment and like this video. Thanks, and see you next time. I never thought what I will tell you would happen, and it is the main reason why they should not trust even their own shadow. I am Stella, I am 56 years old, and I am a married woman who loves her family above all things. That's why people have sometimes accused me of being too nosy about things I shouldn't care about. I didn't care that they said that because I always hid behind the fact that it was more important to take care of my loved ones than to think about what they would say. But life would give me a reason to start doubting that sticking my nose in everywhere was a good idea. It all started 2 months ago when my youngest daughter, Violet, 25 years old, was preparing to marry Tom, a wealthy 28-year-old young man who was the general manager of a large factory. She was radiant, excited to plan the wedding of the century, because ever since she could remember, my little girl always wanted to get married in style. However, since the marriage proposal, I noticed something strange about Tom. Sometimes I saw him doubtful, as if something was tormenting him or he didn't want to comply with the agreement that, as far as I understood, was mutual. For a moment, I thought it was just normal commitment nerves. But one night, 2 weeks before the wedding, I decided to talk to him. We were at the engagement dinner, so it seemed strange to find him in the living room, lost in thought, staring into space. Even in that posture and with his expression downcast, I have to admit that he was very handsome. That day, he was wearing a dark blue suit that highlighted his athletic figure. The white shirt, rolled up to the elbows, revealed strong, muscular forearms. A steel watch shined on his left wrist, while on his feet, impeccable black shoes completed his elegant outfit. As usual, he wore his brown hair slightly disheveled, and, as was my habit, I looked at his full lips, which were always slightly parted as if waiting to be kissed by someone. I took my gaze away from his physique for a moment. I shouldn't have been thinking about him that way, being my daughter's boyfriend, but it was inevitable. Sometimes I even thought about how lucky Violet had been to get Tom, because I couldn't help thinking that such an attractive man must do everything right. When I looked at him again, the dim light of a table lamp illuminated his face as I watched him sit in an armchair with his hands together in his lap, as if he were about to pray. An awkward silence fell over the room as I watched him, not knowing how to start the conversation. "Tom," I greeted him. He jumped in surprise, but returned my greeting with a nod. "Can I help you with something?" He always responded elegantly. "Actually, I'm not the one who needs help," I said, approaching him. "I've noticed that you're a little weird lately. Is there something that worries you?" I wasn't ashamed to be so daring. In reality, I used my position as an elderly woman to ask the questions I wanted without going around the edges, because in the eyes of minors, it was not considered impertinence if it came from someone older. However, Tom looked at me with a mixture of indecision. "It's nothing," he said. But I had already registered his gaze, and even if I wanted to ignore it, my nosy nature would not allow me to sleep in peace before knowing what was happening to my future son-in-law. "Come," I said, extending a hand. "Accompany me." He looked at my hand suspiciously, but courtesy would not fight with someone as elegant and polite as Tom. When my hand finally touched his, I felt electricity run through my body, something that was confusing at the time. However, we continued walking like this, hand in hand, until we crossed our big house. At the end of the hallway, a carved wooden door gave way to my secret refuge, the wine cellar, a cozy space with stone and brick walls where the soft light created an intimate atmosphere. Bottles of all shapes and colors rested on dark wooden shelves, treasures accumulated over the years. Some wines were gifts from friends, others souvenirs from trips and celebrations. In the center of the winery, a round table with 6 chairs invited you to taste and delight. It was my favorite place to relax, to enjoy a glass of wine and get lost in my thoughts. And that's why I had taken Tom there, away from people who could observe or spy on our conversation, so I could confront him and get the whole story out of him. "You can tell me anything here," I said, sitting down in one of the chairs. "No one will listen to you nor judge you, and everything you tell me will stay here in these 4 walls." He hesitated for a moment, but then sat down next to me. He turned his face and faced me. "Everything," he said, emphasizing the words I had said. "Everything," I answered. He cleared his throat, running a hand through his beard. "Stella, the truth is that I'm afraid of getting married," he confessed to me. My heart sank when I heard his words, remembering the excitement my poor daughter felt when she got engaged and wished to marry Tom. If she knew that her future husband was hesitating to say yes at the altar, she would leave in a flood of tears. "Fear? Why?" I asked with a soft voice, trying not to pressure him. "I haven't lived long enough," he responded in a low voice. "I haven't experienced everything I want before committing to one person." I confess that his response upset me. I didn't expect that to be the reason for his doubts. However, I tried to remain calm. "Tom," I said with an understanding smile, "experience is not everything in life. What matters is love, the connection you have with the person you love. Don't you think Violet is worth everything?" He instead stared at me. He didn't say a word, but his eyes showed me everything I wanted to know about the matter. Tom didn't love my daughter the same way she did. As a mother, that made me sad, but at that moment I wanted to be understanding and think clearly about the best solution for everyone. That's when my mind began to scheme something without realizing it. My daughter would suffer if her beloved boyfriend did not continue with the marriage, in addition to the other preparations that were already practically ready. That's why an idea crossed my mind that was very logical, even though I didn't know how my son-in-law would react. "And if you're worried about experience, I can help you explore, discover new things," I said, trying to sound innocent. An intense blush took over Tom's cheeks. I was sure he wasn't expecting something like that coming from me, but it was the best I could do at the time. I couldn't deny that I liked that because the mere thought that I would be showing hidden things to such an attractive young man made my most sensitive area tingle. "Would you do it?" he asked against all odds. Despite my proposal, I didn't expect such a positive response right away, so I was caught off guard. However, I nodded, giving him to understand that I was serious. "It will be between you and me," I said, to make sure he understood the rules of the game. "No one else will find out." And almost as if it were a racing car when they gave it the green light, Tom's lips possessed mine. They were so fleshy and soft, just as I had imagined when I looked at them. His hand flew to my neck, taking it to guide and deepen the kiss, where soon our tongues were involved. My hands were not at ease either. In fact, one was caressing his bulge that seemed to grow as the seconds passed, while the other was undoing the buttons of his suit. Before I knew it, I was admiring his worked body as he quickly removed my dress. We pushed aside the chairs that were starting to get in the way, while I placed my knees on the floor. There, his friend stood imposing. I licked my lips before I touched his area, then massaged it and took it into my mouth. He grabbed my hair from the moment I started playing with my tongue. Then I decided to go all the way in, moving my head as fast as I could. I remembered all the tricks I had learned after long sessions with various men throughout my life. I applied them point by point with Tom as his mouth called my name in whispered tones. When I looked at him, his eyes were shining and his smile made him seem more relaxed. I rose to kiss him and he reciprocated, taking me in his arms and placing my body on the table. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I lay there on my back, feeling Tom's gaze on my area. "I want you to show me how you like it best," he whispered, and I wanted to. From that point, my voice became Tom's guide, telling him the way I liked him to do things or not. I realized that my future son-in-law was very talented, and I couldn't help but feel envious of my daughter, who would freely enjoy his attention. But I just let myself be carried away by the way his mouth and tongue played. The feeling was so indescribable that at one point the only thing I could do was implore with a loud voice for Tom to continue doing what he was doing. I had already touched the sky when he slipped it in firmly. At that moment, I felt so fulfilled, full of Tom and feeling so many sensations that I just dedicated myself to feeling everything. He did his thing, charging into that spot that made me feel glorious. I soon broke free, shouting his name, and he followed me. Our releases mingled as our bodies seemed to follow in a haze. That, without a doubt, was the first of many times I was with Tom. I taught him many things that I had learned over the years with my husband and other lovers I had in my youth, and he appreciated it by making my daughter happy. He and Violet have a beautiful marriage. They have grown up together and will soon have a beautiful daughter. I was overjoyed when I found out about that, so I decided to thank my son-in-law again for being a good husband in the way he liked best. The cellar was again filled with sighs, gasps, and lots of passion. In the end, I don't care that people judge me because I know that I did what a mother and wife had to do, put their family first. So much for this story, and you, would you dare to get involved in a situation like mine? If you liked it, remember to subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much, and see you next time.